Man, September's an interesting month. All right, it's the start of football season. Everybody gets excited, at least the regular season. Everybody's excited. The pressure's on. Every team feels they have a chance. They have a chance at something. It's what I love about sports. The beginning of the season, it's the hopium's in the air for all franchises. But the Lions specifically with Dan Campbell, we know September, at least the past two seasons, and context does matter because the first season, that team wasn't winning more than 3 games. But you know what? They won 3 games, and it is what it is. But the facts are, Dan Campbell in September, during his Lions tenure, is 1-5.
Yeah.
Like, those are the facts. The context, yeah, it matters, but he's 1-5, point blank. He's 2-7 for his career in September, and that meaning the interim head coach role he had in Miami also factors into that. So 1-5 for the Lions. And I want to ask the question, how important is September this season for Dan and the Lions? Getting off to a good start, because typically they have not done that. 1-6 last year to 8-2. It was kind of the Jekyll and Hyde for the tale of two tapes, the 1-6 to 8-2. But this season has to, and I think will be different. But Sam, how important is September this season for the Lions?
Well, it's very important, and especially for a franchise like the Detroit Lions. Instead of kind of breaking down each game, I'm going to look at it from a more just macro level of being the Lions and what this September could mean. Obviously, I think that they're going to lose to the Kansas City Chiefs. And after that, you're in danger. I'm not saying they're in danger, but if the Detroit Lions get off to a slow start, which they got home against Seattle, then home against Atlanta, and then at Green Bay, those are their September games. If you also include at Kansas City, that's not necessarily a super easy stretch. If the Detroit Lions start September anything worse than 3-1, 2-2, I think there's a faction of Lions fans, and I'm not saying it's right, who are still a little bit apprehensive, are still kind of scared, not stoked. And if the Lions start the season slow, I think there's going to be the doubt, the SOL mentality is going to creep into some of the fans. I'm not saying the players necessarily, because it is a tougher part of their schedule. But at the same time, getting off to a fast start, that is something that the Lions have never done under Dan Campbell. Obviously, last year they had a lot of growing pains to work out at the beginning of the year. They finished at a torrid pace, but they started so slow that even finishing 8-2 couldn't get them into the playoffs. So even though it's only 4 games, I think it's symbolic for the Detroit Lions. They have to start fast. They have to validate all of the hope that us fans have, all of the confidence that the players have, the coaching staff has. I think they can make a lot of more people feel more stoked and not scared if they start out strong, because if they start out slow and there's any danger of it death spiraling, especially if there's any sort of injuries, it would be one of the more disappointing airs in Detroit. Like, you know how excited we all are.
Yes.
This Lions season, there is the amount of juice and electricity, the likes of which I've never seen, even in the mid-2000s, 2010s, when the Lions were coming off a 11-5 season, losing to the Cowboys. Even that season, even that era, there's not as much juice and hopium as there is flowing now. And the best way to keep the hopium going is get off to a fast start. I'm sure you would agree, Jeff.
Yeah, and the part of that, too, in the context side of things, the Lions have had one of the youngest rosters, period, in the NFL the last 2 seasons. So a lot of that I would blame on youth. I mean, Dan walking into a situation where a lot of rookies played immediately, more rookies played the next season. So I think a lot of that has to do with youth, but this season there isn't really much of an excuse. You added veterans on top of who you have already, guys going into their second, third year. That excuse for youth, I don't think is going to work anymore, at least to start the season. You got veterans. You added CJ. Guys are getting older, more experienced, more mature. Like, they're going into their second year now in the offense with Ben Johnson. You're going to a third year, technically, with Aaron Glenn.
Yeah.
So the youth thing you can't use anymore, and that's why I don't think it will happen this season. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because it matters in the NFC North. Like, look around. The Lions' first 4 games: Kansas City, Seattle, on the road to Kansas City, at home to Seattle, at home to Atlanta, and then on the road to Green Bay. I think the floor of that 4-game schedule is 2-2. You can't be any worse than 2-2, because Kansas City, even if you lose to Kansas City, you start 0-1. Fair. Now you got Seattle at home. You got to go win. You have to go win that game. You can't go down 0-2, and I'll explain why. Look across the NFC North. Green Bay's first 4 games: Chicago, Atlanta, New Orleans.
Ooh.
Isn't that tricky?
Yeah.
So a team in Green Bay who no one wants to take serious, you start off with Chicago, Atlanta, New Orleans. I could see them winning all 3 games.
They could.
Especially if Jordan Love is who they think he is. Now, that's the big question mark, but you can't deny they can beat Atlanta. They can beat New Orleans. Like, they can. Now, will they is a different question. Let's move over to the Chicago Bears. First 3 games. Green Bay, Tampa Bay, Kansas City. So Kansas City's a tough one.
Oh, yeah.
But regardless, Tampa Bay, Green Bay, like you see these toss-up games early on in their schedule. Minnesota. And Minnesota's got a tougher one. But they start off with Tampa. They got Philly, Los Angeles, the Chargers. So a little tougher first 3 games. My point is, your schedule at the beginning, the Lions, is much tougher, maybe with Minnesota compared to the rest of the NFC North. You have to get off to a good start. Now, does a division get won in the first 3 games? No. But getting off to a good start matters because it's a matter of when, not if, there's going to be injuries. There's injuries for every NFL team. The Lions got really lucky the last 2 seasons, but really last season on a majority of their guys being healthy. You can't count on that every season. So to start off the way they start off the last 2 seasons, unacceptable. They have to be at least 2-2 the first 4 games, Sam, just to stay alive in this division race, in my opinion.
No, you are 100% right. And I mentioned that Kansas City, I had a whole segment about it the other day where I said that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to beat the Detroit Lions. And no other team in all of the NFL will have an opening game as tough as the Detroit Lions will. And then you even look at the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks were the team that handed the Lions arguably their worst loss of the season. You could argue Carolina. Both of those losses were terrible, but their loss at home versus Seattle was not pretty, at least defensively. And when you look at some of the pieces that they have, obviously Geno Smith, Kenneth Walker, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, that looks like the makings of a pretty explosive offense. And then on defense, remember who they added back? Bobby Wagner. I mean, I know a lot of people forgot about that, but that is a big signing.
That's true.
And their secondary. You got Quandre Diggs and Tariq Woolen, who were Pro Bowlers last year. Jamal Adams, I think people forgot about, coming back from injury. And they drafted Devon Witherspoon.
It's a pretty good secondary.
That is a pretty good secondary. And I think draft Devon Witherspoon coming into that secondary, he will be a guy who's plug and play right away. That's a game where the Lions might miss one Jamison Williams going against that tough secondary. And even you look at the Atlanta Falcons. I know out of all of the 4 games, that is the one that looks to be the most winnable. I think we would all agree, home against the Falcons. But remember what I said about Bijan Robinson. I expect him to come in day 1 and be a superstar, the best running back in the NFC, and I truly believe that, running behind that offensive line led by Chris Lidstrom. They got a couple of weapons in Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and their defense. They added some pieces, Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree, and Jesse Bates, to supplement a defense that already has Grady Jarrett and A.J. Terrell. And then
hey, you forgot about a very important player.
Oh, Jeff Okudah. There's a reason I didn't include him.
Watch out, but continue.
I am not going to watch out because he will be barbecue chicken that day.
Okay, well.
But Jamison Williams won't be there. Wouldn't that be a perfect day for Jamison Williams to just roast Jeff Okudah? Oh, that's right. He can't. He got suspended. But anywho,
roasted.
Watch it.
I know a lot of people are going to come after me again, but the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. And I know that this is the first time in a long time where you're going to play the Packers at Lambeau Field and their starting quarterback isn't Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre. But this is a crazy stat. And this has nothing to do with the Lions of now. But you know what the Lions' record is in their last 29 games at Lambeau Field?
Talk to me.
4-25.
Jesus.
Which is why I think what they did going into Lambeau at the end of the year, that was symbolic, vanquishing some demons. But at the same time, Lambeau Field is never a gimme. And the Packers have some nice pieces, especially in the backfield and on defense. So it's a pretty tough stretch. The Lions have to stay focused, and they have to, at absolute minimum, go 2-2. 3-1 would be ideal,
yes.
But you can't just look ahead of some of these teams like Atlanta and start the season 1-3, or else there will be a lot of doubt amongst fans particularly, but maybe even amongst the players and the coaching staff.
And I want to ask too, because you brought up that stat against for the Packers at least. I wonder what Dan's record is against the Packers. I know they beat them twice last season, and they beat them once prior the prior year. So what is he 3-1?
3-1
against the Packers. So and that was with Aaron Rodgers, your guy. So you would agree that with Jordan Love his first year, it's a downgrade at this point.
Well, one of the one game in 2021, didn't Aaron Rodgers just play one series? They already wrapped it up. And
great. You know what? I was there. A great point, because he left the game. Jordan Love came in, and what happened? Tracy Walker picked him off. So maybe foreshadowing a little bit of what's to come. Who knows? But I'm with you. I think 3-1 is the most ideal scenario, because even Kansas City, it's hard for me, and as Neil would use the term, bricked up. It's hard for me to be bricked up about going to Kansas City and planting my flag that the Lions are going to beat the Chiefs. It's hard, but you could make a case. I think they should be not as bad of an underdog as they are. We talked about that yesterday, but I'm not going to sit here and say the Lions will win that game. But Seattle, Atlanta, Green Bay, you got to win those games. Like Seattle, especially at home. I understand what Seattle is, but you got to avenge the loss from last season. I don't know if this entire season rides on Kansas City, but the next 3 games, listen, and you've said this before too about the Tigers. You can't win a division in the first 25 games, but you can lose one.
Yes.
Same thing with the Lions. You can't win the NFC North, but I'm telling you, the first 5-6 games, you can for sure lose one. And if you put yourself in too deep of a hole, it's going to be hard to climb out of it, Sam. But even in a bad NFC, so I think getting off to an important start in September, they have 4 games in September: Kansas City, Seattle, Atlanta, Green Bay. You got to be 3-1.
No, you're basically telling the story of last year's Lions team, except the difference is last year's Lions team wasn't expected to do anything. If the Lions get off to a bad start with the weight of the expectations that they have, that'll be something different. They obviously already proved that they can finish a season strong, but what they did, which you alluded to, they did lose any chance they had at going to the playoffs by starting 1-6. They basically had to play perfect football the rest of the year, and that is unrealistic for anyone to play in a 10-game stretch, even for a team like the Kansas City Chiefs.
And I want to get to some of these comments before we go to break. Happy Camper Harry says, we are after the Super Bowl. We beat the Chiefs. We'll be affirmation how good we are. We lose. Will be great goal. Will be a great goal throughout the season to get to. Yeah, that's fair as well. Charles says, but Goff has never lost in Green Bay, for as bad as the Lions think Goff is. Interesting. And just to get to some more of these comments, Chuck says, we don't show our playbook week 1. We're going to hide plays to use versus Kansas City in the Super Bowl when we win it.
There we go.
Hey, Chuck, now you're on to Chuck. Now you're on to something. Smart man. Smart man. Let's see. It Hip says, Green Bay is not going to be better. You're crazy, referencing Brandon Katz saying Green Bay will be better. Jordan Love is not a downgrade from a 39-year-old Rodgers. So you're assuming that Jordan Love will come out and throw. What did Rodgers have last season? Like 25 touchdowns, 11 picks?
He had 26-12.
26-12. Is Jordan Love getting that? You putting money on it?
No.
Okay.
I'm not putting money on it. He could be good, but nobody knows anything.
Right.
That's the thing.
That's my point.
And by the way, Jared Goff did lose in Green Bay. Monday Night Football of 2021.
Yeah, that was the game. I think it was tied 17-14 or 17-17, I believe, at the half. It was something like that. And they didn't score the second half. Yeah. I think the Lions did or didn't. That game was frustrating to watch because that was early on, too. You look back, a lot of games the Lions had early in the season. Minnesota last season on the road, they had in the bag until KJ Osborne was wide open because Tracy Walker went down and they didn't. It was whatever. It's besides the point. They're capable, and I think they will do it.